Okay, as they set up for the day, I want to bring in a very special guest with me right now. Forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, it's great to have you here on the program.
For you, Jesse.
Of course, of course. I'm going to have to ask you the million-dollar question right off the back. We have a guy who's saying that it was an accident, that the gun misfired while he was in the backseat of the car. We have the state saying he intentionally shot his wife. The million-dollar question, can a gun go off as he described?
Yeah, it's within it's reasonable. All right, likely. I don't know. I always raise an eyebrow anytime I hear someone say that they've accidentally discharged a weapon. There's two ways. We're talking about a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver, Jesse, and it's what's referred to as a double-action weapon. That means you can initiate it by pulling the trigger. Hammer comes back. And then when it gets to the point where it actuates, the hammer goes forward, falls on the round. There's another way. You can cock the hammer. It's an external hammer. You bring it back like this, and then your finger, if you don't have it on the trigger guard, but inside the trigger guard, you can tap the trigger, and it can discharge. There are very few of these Smith & Wessons that actually just simultaneously discharge in and of themselves if the hammer is back. So what the prosecution is going to do in this case, forensics is going to play a gigantic role in this thing. Everybody from the medical examiner and what's going to be very interesting to the viewers is to hear what the ballistics experts have to say. And they're going to talk a lot about firearms in this case, I can guarantee you. And they're going to talk about how many pounds of pressure it takes to discharge this weapon, and that's going to kind of be the underpinning of this case going forward.
Well, what is the defense going to try to show? The fact that is it possible that someone? First of all, let's not forget this case started off as he wasn't charged with murder yet. He was charged with, I think, involuntary manslaughter. It was a reckless kind of charge. So it was the idea that maybe he was being negligent. He was being reckless. He had a loaded gun in his lap. He fell asleep. But is it not possible that if somebody startles and wakes up, the gun could go off, but to shoot someone right in the particular spot, right where you need to shoot them to kill them, isn't that an issue as well? Isn't it so convenient that the gun went off and shot his wife right in the back, right to kill her?
Yeah, it is rather convenient. And what's going to be really curious about this, Jesse, is the range of fire that's involved here. You have this round, what we know thus far at least, we have this round passing through what we refer to in forensics as an intermediate target. It means it passed through the rear of the seat, the front passenger seat, and after passing through that seat, it struck her in the back, and it delivered a fatal kill shot to her. And keep in mind, this isn't like a typical crime scene. From where they're alleging the actual shooting took place to the emergency room at Emory Hospital is almost 4 miles. And, there's a lot of conjecture going on relative to what initiated this thing. They're talking about, at first, it was thrown out there that there was a bump in a road, that he was holding the weapon. He's kind of in a sleepy state. He was already fearful of the neighborhood they were in. When they went over the bumpy road, the weapon accidentally discharged. Well, what I would like to know is, when the ballistics experts look at the back of this seat of this car, and they will have removed the seat from the car, and there's a good chance they'll bring it into court. That'll be kind of interesting. And if there's any kind of evidence of gunfire on the back of that seat, that'll give us a range determination. Was it pressed against the rear of the seat, or was it fired at a distance? We would think that many times if somebody's firing with a purpose, like they're trying to kill someone, they would take that weapon and jam it into the back of the seat and pull the trigger and initiate this thing. At what range was the muzzle of the end of the weapon, the end of the barrel, from the actual surface of the back of the seat? The injuries that she will have sustained, Jesse, are what are going to be referred to as atypical, because, as I said earlier, this round is passing through an intermediate target. And inside the interior of one of these seats has all kinds of framing, okay, metallic framing, this sort of thing, and plus it has to pass through the fabric of the seat and then strike her. So the bullet, after it struck her, I've seen cases like this. I can't speak to this case specifically, but I've seen cases like this. When the bullet finally hits the target, the person, the bullet can be rather deformed. So the injury itself will not look like a typical gunshot wound, for instance. It might be slightly deformed if it struck part of the metal framework as it was passing through. It could deform the bullet. Also, it can fragment the bullet and create little satellite injuries. I'm going to be really interested as a forensic scientist just to see what they found at autopsy here. The medical examiner's testimony will be quite compelling as well.
Yeah. Just to let our viewers know, you're watching a live feed right now in the Tex McIver case. It is yet to start. We expect opening statements, and this is going to be an explosive case. As we've been talking about, you have this prominent attorney, Tex McIver, who is charged with the shooting death of his wife. He was in the back seat of a car where she was and another person as well. The three of them were driving, and he is claiming that he dozed off with a loaded weapon in his lap, and early reports indicated that he had the weapon in his lap because they were going through a dangerous neighborhood, and he was afraid of even the Black Lives Matter movement in that neighborhood. And he had a gun on his lap, and he says that he dozed off, and when he woke up, he got startled, and the gun accidentally went off and shot his wife. Now, the prosecution's not buying that. They're saying that this was an intentional shooting, that he did want to kill his wife. And one of the reasons is a financial motive. What's been coming out in the last few days is the presence of this mysterious second will that Diane MacGyver, again the victim, that she allegedly crafted. And apparently it didn't look so good for Tex McIver. It would not have put him in a good position. And so the question becomes, what's going to happen with this second will? We know that no one's produced the second will, but the judge in this case is going to allow testimony about the second will. And so you're going to hear this back and forth between the prosecution and the defense battling it out, because really that is the motive in this case. And although we always say motive is not an element of the crime, it really does add to the story. Again, I'm here, before we join in, I do want to mention one other thing. The jury is split up between 6 men and 6 women. It's 9 white individuals, 3 black individuals, and 4 alternates. Again, we believe 1 juror was excused, so due to a family emergency. They're waiting to start right now. The judge is speaking to the jury, but there's a lot of questions in this case, and we want to make sure we fully understand it. So again, I'm here with a forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, you talked a little bit about the vehicle and how this isn't a standard crime scene. It's not like she got shot in a house or in a field. This is in a vehicle. So what goes on in trying to examine the vehicle itself? And you talked about earlier about what set the gun off. Maybe there was a bump. How do they go about investigating the vehicle?
They're going to do a trigger pressure test on the suspected weapon, and what that's going to do, Jesse, is people at home may be familiar with the term hair trigger. What they'll do is they'll take the ballistics expert at the crime lab will take this weapon, and they'll place a number of graduated weights on the trigger to see how many pounds of pressure it takes to initiate that hammer on that weapon going forward. And that's going to give an indication as to how light the trigger was. And again, this is going to, it's good and bad for the defense if the prosecution can demonstrate that it takes a significant amount of trigger pressure, pounds, to initiate this weapon. Then the hair trigger thing kind of goes out the window, unless they're going to say that he had some kind of physical or mental malady at that moment in time that just caused him to reactively pull the trigger. I think they're going to have to go a long way in order to prove that. And as far as the vehicle, and the vehicle is in fact the primary crime scene in this case. It's not traditional like we think of, say, in a home, as you had mentioned, or in a street or something like that. The vehicle is the crime scene. From a logistics standpoint, working one of these cases in a vehicle is a very tight space. But on the upside, from a forensic standpoint, your forensics remains rather contained, doesn't it? We're talking about things like gunshot residue, anything else that may have come about, the DNA. And Also, I'm very curious regarding what we refer to as positionality. What positions were all of these individuals in within this small contained space? What position was MacIver in relative to his wife? And then, of course, we have to think about the driver. What did she hear? What did she see? Did she catch anything in her peripheral vision that made her wince? Did she hear something? And all of this is in context to this small space. We can all pretty much identify with riding along in a car with a group of people. It's hard to contain conversation because it's such a tight space. You can pretty much hear what everyone is saying. And if there's an argument that had, preceded this or whatever the case might be. So that's going to go into this, into this mix relative to what we're going to see portrayed on the stand.
Right.
Going forward, that combined with the physical evidence from the forensics.
Joseph, you mentioned it itself. There was another witness in the car, and one of the things that led investigators to really think that this was murder is the fact that there was allegations, and that he's now charged with that allegations that Tex McIver was trying to suppress her statements, trying to influence a witness. And that is one of the reasons that they felt that there was something more nefarious going on, and there just wasn't an accident or some sort of reckless act, that this was murder. So again, we should let our viewers know that in the indictment, Mr. MacGyver is charged with murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and then 3 counts of influencing witnesses. And somebody who's on trial for murder, that never looks good. But, Joseph, I want to touch upon one thing that you mentioned. You mentioned the fact that about this crime scene. We saw a similar case that we've been covering here on Law and Crime. It was the Todd Kenhammer case, where a man was found guilty of killing his wife, made it look like an accident, that he said they were driving and that a pipe fell off of a flatbed truck, went through the windshield and hit his wife and killed her. My question, I'm sure this is a question that many people have looked at in the Tex McIver cases, if somebody really wanted to kill their wife, would you do it when somebody else is in the car? And wouldn't you find a different kind of way of doing it as opposed to this kind of way? I mean, you have somebody else in the car. There seems to be an easier way, I would imagine, of trying to kill someone and dispose of their body instead of everyone knows that you're the one who fired the gun. Everybody knows that you're saying it's an accident. Wouldn't there be a different way to do it? Isn't it a little strange to say that somebody that intentionally tried to kill their wife did it in that manner?
Yeah, it does seem strange to us. We, of course, this goes kind of to his state of mind. Maybe he's, like they say, crazy like a fox. Maybe he wanted a witness to this thing to kind of alibi himself. There's any number of scenarios that we can talk about here. Yeah, it would seem that you would want to do this in a much more stealthy way instead of on a public street in a contained vehicle with a witness. And hey, Jesse, you know what else? There's no guarantee that if he did purposefully, as the indictment reads, malice aforethought, felt as though, there's no guarantee that round is going to kill her. That's a one-off chance that you're actually going to strike her in a fatal area. This is, it's kind of unfortunate, but it's kind of a lucky shot that you would have a round transmit itself through an intermediate target and strike her in a vital area. She was dead within, I might be wrong, but I think within 4 hours of admission. They took her to Emory where they did surgery on her, and she succumbed to her injuries. So you're taking quite a risk here. It's a head scratcher, this particular case. That's why I believe that forensics is going to be so very essential in this case. Yeah.
I want to let our viewers know also, you're watching, again, a live feed. The back and forth between the defense and the prosecution is going to be pretty good because the defense here, there's a pretty big legal team here. It's led by Don Samuel and Bruce Harvey, and they each have really significant clients, entertainers, rappers, people in the NFL, while the prosecutor in this case, Clint Rucker, he won a conviction against Fulton County Courthouse killer Brian Nichols. So you really have these heavyweights going against each other in this case. You're not going to want to miss anything. As soon as the case starts, we're going to make sure to go to it. But that is not the only case that we're covering here. If you go to lawandcrime.com right now, we're streaming the Worley case out of Ohio. Now, this guy, I'm going to talk to our guest about this one as well. This is a really, really disturbing case of a man who was charged with the abduction and murder of a young 20-year-old University of Toledo student named Sierra Joggin. Really disturbing details in this case. And Joe, I want to talk to you a little bit about this one. When the police did search warrants, they conducted search warrants on his property, they found a lot of disturbing details, particularly a freezer filled with blood. From your perspective as a forensic death investigator, what did you make of what was on his property?
Well, it appears that what was strange to me, Jesse, is the reports that I'm hearing is the position of the orientation of this freezer. The freezer is kind of down in a secluded area, and that gives me an idea that this is something that was to be kept out of sight, kind of secluded. Blood was found in here. And also something else that has been mentioned is this idea of bleach. The smell of bleach was heavy in this area. So, it gives us pause to think that something was being concealed there. Where, say, for instance, if you had taken someone's life, you can actually retard the decomposition process, and this has been done any number of times over the course of criminal history, where bodies will be frozen, and it slows down the natural decomposition process, and then the body is removed and placed into another area, and it kind of throws you off scent. You really have to be on your game from a criminal standpoint to be thinking about and considering these kinds of things. But what else was done to her? We know that she was tied. She had been strangled, obviously, and there's a term that we use that I teach here at Jacksonville State to my students. It's called individualization, and this goes to everything, Jesse. We can talk about ballistics, we can talk about instruments of death, but specifically, and something people will be familiar with, that's the idea of DNA. At any other point in time, would her DNA have been found at this site? And if that is her DNA contained within those blood samples at that cooler, the defense is going to have a very difficult road in trying to, take the eyes of the jury off of that evidence, because it's quite compelling.
Well, let's talk about that. Wasn't his DNA and her DNA combined in certain items, and it's really the DNA evidence as well as his cell phone evidence is really linking both of them together at key locations in this crime?
Yeah, and that's what we refer to as commingling of this DNA evidence. And again, it's we talk in such big numbers, billions and trillions and quadrillions and that sort of thing when it comes to DNA. What are the odds that you're going to get? Well, first off, if you can get somebody identified, the likelihood that they're going to be anybody else that's attached to that DNA those numbers are mind-blowing. But then you take one stranger and another stranger and commingle their DNA, and that puts even a finer point on this thing. That's what makes this such an uphill battle for the defense in this particular case. How are they going to explain away these scientific facts? And what's key here is, will the prosecution do a good job in presenting this highly complex science to the jury? And one of the things I've heard over the years is that, relative to jury statements and that sort of thing, this thought that, yeah, the science is really fantastic, it's really cool, but they were talking in terms that I just didn't understand. I think that we can kind of see that played out in the DNA evidence in O.J. Simpson. Those poor jury members were essentially bludgeoned with DNA for days upon days upon days. It would make those of us in science even, it wears on you after a while. So can they synthesize this down and paint a compelling case with this and really paint a simple narrative that everybody can understand?
Well, yesterday, anybody was following the case, we know that some tape of Worley was released to the jury, and he's heard on tape saying, he's telling investigators that he lost his motorcycle helmet, fuses, sunglasses, and a screwdriver when his motorcycle broke down. But coincidentally, all of those items were the things that are implicating him in this crime. I mean, it's, in other words, he basically, before that information was even released to the public, he knew about those items. So why would somebody that knew about those items say to the police, oh, I'm missing them, I don't have them, when they're ultimately found at the crime scene?
Yeah, this goes to this idea. I wanted to keep my mouth shut, but I didn't have the ability. And sometimes people begin to talk about things like this when either they're thinking that it's what the police want to hear, they want to push the spotlight off of themselves just to get out of the interview process, this sort of thing. And he's obviously kind of painted himself into the proverbial corner with this. This is going to be another building block, foundational building block for this Worley case moving forward that the state's presenting.
Yeah, I mean, he repeatedly told investigators that he didn't have anything to do with this. He's like, how do you kidnap somebody and take him on a motorcycle? But at the same time, he couldn't explain why he had blood on the motorcycle helmet at all. And as you said, Joseph, you really can't deny forensic evidence, and you can't deny cell phone data that really pinpoints you at the key locations in this this case. So it's going to be an interesting one to follow. Again, you can go to lawandcrime.com right now. We are streaming that one. But Joseph and I are talking about the Tex McIver case. We do have a live feed in that courtroom. The judge is giving some preliminary instructions to the jury. Again, this prominent attorney who was charged in the shooting death of his wife. The state believes that he intentionally did kill his wife, Diane MacGyver, while the defense team is saying this was all an accident, that he was in the same car with his wife, he was holding a loaded weapon on his lap, and that the gun went off by accident when he got startled. We do have a live feed in the courtroom if we can show it to our viewers. Again, the judge is giving preliminary instructions to the jury, and we are waiting to hear back on it. And Joseph and I are talking a little bit more about it. Joseph, in terms of more evidence about this case, besides the actual crime scene and the vehicle itself, what else would you look at? Maybe would you look at their home? Would you look at other areas of business? What other items, other crime scenes would you look at? Not the crime scenes, but other areas in their life would you look at if you have a husband who's on trial for the murder of his wife?
Yeah, can I just start from an elemental standpoint here? I'm very curious about the relationship between these three people in the vehicle. I want to know, just from a relational standpoint, they're at the scene, or within the vehicle, as we've established that the vehicle is, in fact, apparently going to be the sole scene here. I want to know if these individuals have ever ridden in this configuration before, because this goes to relationship, Jesse. Has the lady that was driving the vehicle transported these two before, and with what frequency has she done it? Is there any kind of contentiousness between the three principals here in this vehicle? Has MacGyver ever ridden in that particular position in the vehicle before? Or did they take this, did the lady that was driving, did she see this as a strange request? Was it just standard for them to do this?
Well, actually, Joseph, here's the question, right? If we believe MacGyver's story that he was almost a protector in the car, that he had a gun because they were driving through a dangerous neighborhood, would it make more sense for that armed person to be in the back seat, like MacGyver was, or in the passenger side seat? You know, if you're sitting in the passenger side seat with a loaded weapon, you can imagine the danger to the driver, you can imagine the danger to yourself, and you can also imagine the danger of someone driving by and seeing a gun. But if you're in the back seat, you might be able to conceal it a little bit more, no?
Yeah, you could, and I guess that's one way of looking at it. I think that if it were me and I wanted to be a protector, I'd want to be in control of the vehicle and have a weapon. If they, he's painting Atlanta like it's some horrible place, and it's really not. It's not that of a violent city. I worked in New Orleans, trust me, before I arrived in Atlanta many years ago. And it's not, in this area that they were in, yeah, there's homeless people. He had put that out, aggressive panhandling. But any major city, you're going to have that. I'm not buying into this whole idea that, he's in fear of his life relative to this. And I think that the defense is going to have to go a long way to prove that this goes to his state of mind, why he had the weapon out in the first place. And what initiated this? Remember, they were talking about how the weapon was carried in the front console. In the front console, what they're referring to is that area in between the passenger seat and the driver's seat, forward in the compartment, that he apparently reached forward, clicked open the console, took this .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver out, and then rode with it in his lap. Well, I think my question is that if you're riding with it in your lap and you feel the need to have this weapon out in this particular area, I think a big question it has to ask is, why are you dozing off to sleep? If you're on watch, why are you dozing off in this environment that you're so terrified to be in? That's something that I don't understand.
Yeah.
They traveled some distance back into the city from a town called Eatonton that's way down the I-20 corridor east of Atlanta to get back. At what point in time did he take this weapon out of the console? Did he take it out, the whatever it is, 70 plus miles away east of Atlanta and ride all the way down Interstate 20 with it in his lap? Or did he not take it out until they got into the greater metro area because he's in fear of his life and fear for the safety of the people in the vehicle? That was a big red flag for me, Jesse, when I heard that he had stated that, he's scared to be in this area, but yet he drifts off to sleep. And that's kind of curious to me.
I can tell you, I don't think you're the only one that saw that as a red flag either, and I can imagine that the prosecution's really going to hamp on that point. I mean, you would have to imagine so. Again, you're watching a live feed in the Tex McIver case. The judge is giving some preliminary instructions to the jury. Joseph, stand by. We're going to move right into the courtroom. Let's listen in a little bit to the judge speaking to the jury.
Courtroom demonstrated something far away and you can't see it or hear it right away, let us know. That's not a problem. The reverse, it is a problem if you can't see or hear or you're losing focus, and we need to address it. Addressing it could be telling someone to speak up. It could be giving you an opportunity just to stretch. It could be you need a 5-minute break. We will break as often as you all need to break. We're just not getting stuff done while we're taking breaks. But you all need to be as focused as can be. So please keep me posted if that ever changes. It's essential that you view the evidence in this case with an open mind and reach no final conclusions until you've heard and seen all the evidence, received closing arguments, and received the law that you must apply to the facts.
That's the judge giving some preliminary instructions to the jury in the Tex McIver case. You can imagine that's not an easy task for them, being a jury on this panel, and it was hard getting a jury that was unbiased and didn't know that much about the case, if anything, and even if they did know something about the case, that they could render an unbiased verdict, that they would let the evidence guide them and not what they've seen in the media so far. Easier said than done in this kind of case. We should let you know that the jurors are going to be allowed to ask questions during the trial. We've seen that before in other cases, so it'll be interesting to see what they might ask in this one. But again, this is not the only case that we're covering here. We're also covering the James Worley case out of Ohio. You can go to lawandcrime.com right now. We're streaming it live if you want to look into that case. We have a short preview, a short package about what this case is about. Take a look.
The trial of James Dean Worley is underway in Ohio. Worley is accused of killing a 20-year-old woman. On July 19, 2016, Sierra Joggin went for a bike ride with her boyfriend in a rural area of Fulton County, Ohio. At the end of the ride, the two parted ways, and that was the last time the young University of Toledo student would be seen alive. When Sierra didn't make it home that night, her mother filed a missing persons report. Local law enforcement officials began the frantic search for the young woman, gone without a trace. Investigators found their first break in the case, Sierra's bicycle, in a nearby cornfield. The abandoned bike was found alongside a motorcycle helmet, bloodstains, and signs of a struggle. These clues would lead police to the shallow grave off of County Road 7 where Sierra's body was found.
Authorities searching an area around County Road 7 tragically found what we believe to be Sierra's remains.
Local Delta resident James Worley would become the focus of the investigation after he admitted to being in the area where the bicycle was found. Worley claimed his motorcycle had broken down when he rolled into a nearby cornfield and discovered the abandoned bike. But investigators became very suspicious of the 57-year-old when they observed fresh scratches and bruising on his arms and legs. But it was the search of Worley's property that shocked this small Ohio town. While searching his property, investigators found a hidden room inside the barn. The room contained a carpet-lined freezer, handcuffs and restraints, and blood stains on the walls and floors. Investigators seized multiple pairs of women's underwear, handguns, a shock collar, and a rope. And making this case even stranger, Worley was convicted for abducting another woman riding her bike in 1990 and was released after serving just 3 years in prison. We'll be covering this trial on the Law and Crime Network and keep you updated on the case. For Law and Crime, I'm Rachel Stockman.
Convicted a predator of women, and now he's on trial again, now for being involved in the abduction and murder of another girl. It's a really sad case that we're covering. You can go to lawandcrime.com to follow it live. Again, I'm here with forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, quick question for you about the Worley case. When you see the body was bound and gagged and left in a shallow ditch, and then you also know that she died from asphyxiation. Does that give you any clues about who the killer might be? For example, if you have him on trial as opposed to a complete stranger or a family member, the way in which she died, what does that tell you?
Well, strangulation or asphyxial deaths, as they're termed, are very, very personal cases, Jesse. This is something, it's not like taking a weapon and shooting somebody at a great distance. This is up close and personal. Many times you'll even hear people, profilers and criminologists refer to this as an intimate event because you are so up close. Some of these serial killers that are out there that engage in this behavior regularly talk about the intimacy of the event. And this goes to a bigger point that kind of sends a chill up my spine relative to this particular case. This guy was well prepared.
Yeah.
That area at the barn, boy, I tell you, man, he had
Joseph. Joseph, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're going to talk a little bit more about Worley, but we do have right now a live feed in the MacGyver case. The state is going to deliver their openings, so let's listen in live.